Another day, another story. A team of Italian researchers have entered the debate over the Shroud of Turin, the linen cloth believed by some to have been Jesus Christ's burial shroud. In a study published in the journal Heritage, the authors conducted dating work on a sample from the shroud, coming to the conclusion that it may be a 2,000-year-old relic. The shroud, which has long been the subject of intense scrutiny, features a faint image of man that some believe is the body of Jesus miraculously imprinted onto the cloth. Welcome to Tabot Eminent Channel. While the latest study does not discuss the question of whether or not the artifact was indeed Jesus' burial shroud, the authors did find that its age is roughly consistent with his time. The findings challenge previous research supporting a medieval origin of the shroud, which is one of the most studied archaeological objects in the world. In a study published in the journal Heritage, the authors conducted dating work on a sample from the shroud, coming to the conclusion that it may be a 2,000-year-old relic. The shroud, which has long been the subject of intense scrutiny, features a faint image of man that some believe is the body of Jesus miraculously imprinted onto the cloth. While the latest study does not discuss the question of whether or not the artifact was indeed Jesus' burial shroud, the authors did find that its age is roughly consistent with his time. The findings challenge previous research supporting a medieval origin of the shroud, which is one of the most studied archaeological objects in the world. Among the research indicating a medieval origin for the shroud is pivotal radiocarbon study conducted in the late 1980s, which concluded that the linen dates to between AD 1260 and AD 1390, corresponding with the artifact's first documented appearance in France in the 1350s. These results indicated that it was not the burial cloth of Jesus. But some experts, such as the authors of the Heritage study, argue that these tests might have been flawed due to contamination. Such arguments revolving the contamination hypothesis have previously been challenged as well. In the Heritage study, lead researcher Liberato De Caro, from the Institute of Crystallography in Italy, and colleagues employed a novel method for dating ancient linen threads by inspecting their structural degradations using a technique known as wide-angle X-ray scattering. This was applied to a small sample from the shroud, which currently resides in the Cathedral of St. John the Baptist in Turin, Italy. The authors said the results of their analysis were fully compatible with analogous measurements obtained from a linen sample whose dating, according to historical records, is AD 5574, and consistent with the hypothesis that the shroud is a 2,000-year-old relic. The authors note that the results are only compatible with this hypothesis under the condition that the artifact was kept at suitable levels of average temperature, around 22.5 degrees Celsius, or 72.5 degrees Fahrenheit, and a relative humidity of 75–75% for 13 centuries of unknown history, in addition to 7 centuries of known history in Europe. Since the results do not agree with previous radiocarbon dating research, the authors said, a more accurate and systematic X-ray investigation of more samples taken from the Turin shroud fabric would be mandatory to confirm the conclusions of our study. A controversial linen shroud regarded by some to be the one Jesus was buried in has baffled the world for more than centuries. When it was first exhibited in the 1350s, the Shroud of Turin was touted as the actual burial shroud used to wrap the mutilated body of Christ after his crucifixion. Also known as the Holy Shroud, it bears a faint image of the front and back of a bearded man, which many believers is Jesus' body miraculously imprinted onto the fabric. But research in the 1980s appeared to debunk the idea it was real after dating it to the Middle Ages, hundreds of years after Christ's death. Now, Italian researchers who used a new technique involving X-rays to date the material have confirmed it was manufactured around the time of Jesus about 2,000 years ago. But research in the 1980s appeared to debunk the idea it was real after dating it to the Middle Ages, hundreds of years after Christ's death. Now, Italian researchers who used a new technique involving X-rays to date the material have confirmed it was manufactured around the time of Jesus about 2,000 years ago. It has been preserved since 1578 in the Royal Chapel of the Cathedral of San Giovanni Battista in Turin, Italy. The cloth appears to show faint, brownish images on the front and back, depicting a gaunt man with sunken eyes who was about 5 feet 7 to 6 feet tall. Markings on the body also correspond with crucifixion wounds of Jesus mentioned in the Bible, including thorn marks on the head, lacerations on the back, and bruises on the shoulders. Historians have suggested that the cross he carried on his shoulders weighed around 300 pounds, which would have left contusions. The Bible states Jesus was whipped by the Romans, aligning with the lacerations on the back, who also placed crown of thorns on his head before the crucifixion. In 1988, a team of international researchers analyzed a small piece of the shroud using carbon dating and determined the cloth seemed to have been manufactured sometime between 1260 and 1390 AD. This technique used the decay of a radioactive isotope of carbon, 14C, to measure the time and date objects containing carbon-bearing material. Some experts have said that the linen's authenticity should no longer be disputed, claiming it was made from flax grown in the Middle East and features a helmet-style crown of thorns on the man's face. Cellulose is made up of long chains of sugar molecules linked together that break over time, showing how long a garment or cloth has been around. To date the shroud, the team used specific aging parameters, including temperature and humidity, which cause significant breakdown of cellulose. ASED on the amount of breakdown, the team determined that the Shroud of Turin was likely kept at temperatures at about 72.5 degrees Fahrenheit and a relative humidity of around 55% for about 13 centuries before it arrived in Europe. If it had been kept in different conditions, the aging would be different. The data profiles were fully compatible with analogous measurements obtained on a linen sample whose dating, according to historical records, is 5574 AD, found at Masada, Israel, Herod's famous fortress built on a limestone bedrock overlooking the Dead Sea, reads the study published in the journal Heritage. The team also compared the shroud with samples from linens manufactured between 1260 and 1390 AD, finding none were a match. To make the present result compatible with that of the 1988 radiocarbon test, the Shroud of Turin should have been conserved during its hypothetical 7 centuries of life at a secular room temperature very close to the maximum values registered on the Earth, the study reads. Lead author Dr. Liberato De Caro said in a statement that the 1988 test should be deemed as incorrect because fabric samples are usually subject to all kinds of contamination, which cannot be completely removed from the dated specimen. If the cleaning procedure of the sample is not thoroughly performed, carbon-14 dating is not reliable, he added. This may have been the case in 1988, as confirmed by experimental evidence showing that when moving from the periphery towards the center of the sheet, along the longest side, there is a significant increase in carbon-14. Scientists have long been studying the Shroud of Turin with hopes of solving the centuries-old mystery. Thanks for watching. Request you to subscribe the channel.